America is full of strange corners, places where the ground hums, compasses spin, and the laws of nature seem to take a day off. Some of these spots have been studied for decades, and scientists still walk away scratching their heads. Here are the 15 most mysterious places in U.S. scientists can't explain. Number 15. The Bridgewater Triangle, southeastern Massachusetts. Tucked into a roughly 200 square mile stretch of southeastern Massachusetts, the Bridgewater Triangle has been producing strange reports since colonial times. The region covers towns like Rehoboth, Abington, and the town of Freetown, home to the Freetown Fall River State Forest, which has its own long and troubling history. Native American oral traditions describe this land as cursed long before European settlers arrived. Since then, the area has accumulated an almost absurd catalog of anomalies. UFO sightings, mysterious lights, poltergeist activity, cattle mutilations, and a startling number of violent crimes concentrated in the Freetown Forest. Researchers have noted that the triangle sits at the intersection of several ancient Native American sites, including the Hockomock Swamp, whose name roughly translates from the Wampanoag language to place where spirits dwell. The swamp itself is enormous, nearly 17,000 acres, and has produced sightings of giant birds, pterodactyl-like creatures, and large black dogs that vanish into the tree line. Biologists who have studied the swamp find nothing particularly unusual about its ecology. Yet the density of reported phenomena here is unlike almost anywhere else in New England. What makes Bridgewater particularly interesting to researchers is the layered nature of its strangeness. It is not just ghost lights or just creature sightings. It is everything at once, stacked in the same geography over the same centuries. The Freetown Fall River State Forest alone generated dozens of police reports through the 1980s and 1990s involving ritualistic animal sacrifice, unexplained fires, and witness accounts of figures in the woods at night. Local law enforcement eventually acknowledged a pattern they could not easily attribute to any single group or cause. Whether the area attracts unusual human behavior because of something in the land, or whether the legend simply draws people who produce unusual events, is a question no one has cleanly answered. The triangle remains genuinely unexplained, and for a place this size to generate this volume of consistent reports over this many centuries, that is difficult to simply dismiss. Number 14. Skinwalker Ranch, Uinta Basin, Utah. If there is one place in the United States where the word unexplained barely scratches the surface, it is Skinwalker Ranch in the Uinta Basin of northeastern Utah. The roughly 512-acre property sits near the town of Ballard and has a documented history of anomalous activity stretching back through Ute tribal oral traditions. Traditions that named this land as a corridor for supernatural entities long before any rancher built a fence on it. The Sherman family, who purchased the ranch in 1994, lasted less than 2 years. They described mutilated cattle with surgical precision, animals disappearing in broad daylight, poltergeist activity inside their home, and structured aerial objects hovering silently over the fields at night. When billionaire Robert Bigelow purchased the property in 1996, he moved in a full-time scientific team. What they documented over the following years, including apparent portals, orbs that could interact with observers, and physical effects on both people and animals, was serious enough to attract the attention of the U.S. Department of Defense. Brandon Fugel, the current owner, has said publicly that he was a skeptic when he bought the ranch. That skepticism apparently did not survive long. The phenomena reported here cover an unusual range: electromagnetic anomalies, radiation spikes, apparent poltergeist events, and aerial phenomena that do not match any known aircraft. Decades of scientific investigation have produced a great deal of data and zero clear explanations. Number 13. The Zone of Silence, Chihuahuan Desert, near U.S. border. Technically located just across the border in the Mexican state of Chihuahua, the Zona del Silencio sits so close to the Texas and New Mexico borders and has influenced so much American scientific and military attention that it earns a place on this list. The area sits between the 26th and 28th parallels, a latitude that also passes through the Egyptian pyramids, the Bermuda Triangle, and the Himalayas, a coincidence that has inspired no shortage of theories. What is documented is this: radio signals go dead in the zone. Compasses behave erratically. In 1970, an American Athena rocket launched from White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico went wildly off course and crashed directly into the zone of silence, a 1 in millions probability given the terrain involved. The U.S. Air Force sent a recovery team and reportedly had significant communication difficulties in the area. The Mexican government subsequently established a research station there. The region also produces an unusual concentration of meteorites, which researchers attribute to some kind of localized magnetic anomaly. The soil composition has been analyzed multiple times, and while it is somewhat unusual, nothing identified in standard geological surveys fully explains the radio blackouts or compass failures. Scientists continue to study it. They continue to disagree about why it behaves the way it does. Number 12. The Oregon Vortex, Gold Hill, Oregon. The Oregon Vortex near Gold Hill has been a tourist attraction since the 1930s, which almost works against it. It sounds like a roadside gimmick. But the site, centered on an old assay office that once served gold miners, has produced consistent measurements of spatial distortion that researchers have struggled to explain for nearly a century. Inside the vortex, brooms stand at impossible angles. People appear to change height depending on where they stand relative to each other. Balls roll uphill. Optical illusions are the standard scientific explanation, and that may well account for some of what visitors experience, but surveyors who have taken careful measurements at the site have documented consistent deviations from expected norms that are not easily written off as perceptual tricks. John Lister, a geologist and mining engineer, studied the site intensively for years before his death in 1959. He reportedly filled several boxes with notes and measurements, but never published conclusions, telling associates that the world was simply not ready for what he had found. Whether that was dramatic flair or genuine scientific restraint is impossible to know now. The measurements, however, remain on record, and some of them are genuinely odd. Native American tribes in the region reportedly refused to enter the area long before any European settlers built anything on it. Horses brought to the site are said to have consistently refused to approach the center of the vortex. The current operators of the tourist attraction have maintained Lister's original survey equipment on site, and visitors can observe the optical effects for themselves. Multiple physics professors and optical scientists have visited over the decades, and while most lean toward an optical illusion explanation rooted in the tilted geometry of the surrounding landscape, none have produced a model that fully replicates every measured anomaly. The Oregon Vortex is small, unpretentious, and one of the more stubborn little puzzles in the American West. Number 11. The Marfa Lights, Marfa, Texas. On clear nights along U.S. Highway 67 between Marfa and Presidio, Texas, you can see lights that have no business being there. They hover above the desert floor, split apart, merge back together, change color, and move in ways that eliminate headlights, aircraft, and most atmospheric explanations. The lights were first formally reported by European settlers in the 1880s, though Apache oral traditions reference them going back much further. The Mitchell Flat area east of Marfa has been the focus of multiple scientific investigations. Atmospheric physicists have proposed that the lights are caused by temperature inversions and the refraction of car headlights from Highway 67. That explanation has two problems. The lights predate Highway 67 by decades, and they behave in ways that refracted headlights simply do not. They accelerate, they hover, they split. A 2004 investigation by a team from Sul Ross State University measured the lights using triangulation and found that at least some of them were occurring in locations with no vehicular traffic whatsoever. The University of Texas at Dallas sent its own researchers and came back largely puzzled. Texas has officially designated a viewing area for the lights, which is either a testament to scientific curiosity or the most understated government response to an unexplained phenomenon in American history. Number 10. The Michigan Triangle, Lake Michigan. The Great Lakes do not get nearly enough attention in the annals of American mysteries, and Lake Michigan in particular seems determined to correct that. The Michigan Triangle covers a roughly triangular area of Lake Michigan between the cities of Ludington, Benton Harbor, and Manitowoc, Wisconsin, and it has been accumulating strange incidents since at least the 19th century. In 1891, the schooner Thomas Hume vanished on the lake along with its crew of 7 on a clear day with no recorded storm. The ship was never found. In 1937, a Northwest Airlines flight disappeared over the triangle with no survivors and, initially, no wreckage. In 1950, Captain George Donner of the O.M. McFarland disappeared from a locked cabin in the middle of the lake while the ship was underway. His crew heard him retire for the night, knocked on his door 3 hours later, and found the cabin empty. There is no Bermuda Triangle-style warm current or unusual weather pattern in Lake Michigan to blame. The lake is cold, deep, and thoroughly studied. What it is not is fully explained. The Coast Guard maintains that the disappearances are statistical coincidences across a heavily trafficked body of water. Statisticians who have examined the density of incidents in the triangle compared to the rest of the lake have occasionally questioned that conclusion. Lake Michigan is also the site of one of the most puzzling underwater discoveries in the Great Lakes region, a collection of stones arranged on the lake floor near Traverse City that some researchers have described as resembling a crude Stonehenge configuration, complete with what appeared to be a carved image of a mastodon on one of the rocks. The site was found during a 2007 sonar survey and has been subsequently visited by divers. Dating the arrangement has proven difficult, and the geological and archaeological communities remain divided on whether the formation is man-made or the product of natural geological processes. In Lake Michigan, even the bottom of the lake raises questions. Number 9. Superstition Mountains, Apache Junction, Arizona. East of Phoenix, the Superstition Mountains rise out of the Sonoran Desert with a profile that looks like something designed to be ominous. The Apache called the mountains the home of the thunder god and warned settlers away from them with unmistakable seriousness. The settlers, being settlers, did not listen. The mountains are most famous for the legend of the Lost Dutchman's gold mine, a supposedly immensely rich gold deposit found by German immigrant Jacob Waltz in the 1870s and never relocated after his death. Dozens of people have gone into the superstitions looking for it. A notable number of them did not come back. Since the 1800s, more than 100 people have died in the mountains under circumstances ranging from exposure to violence to causes that were never determined. What makes the superstitions genuinely mysterious beyond the gold legend is the persistent electromagnetic anomalies recorded throughout the range. Compasses behave erratically in multiple documented locations. Electronic equipment fails. In 2009, a researcher named Jesse Kappen disappeared in the mountains while searching for the mine. His body was not found until 2012, wedged in a crevice in circumstances that investigators described as deeply confusing. The mountains have been geologically surveyed many times. The electromagnetic anomalies have no confirmed source. Number 8. Point Pleasant and the TNT area, West Virginia. Point Pleasant, West Virginia, sits at the confluence of the Ohio and Kanawha rivers and achieved a kind of permanent notoriety after the Silver Bridge collapsed on December 15, 1967, killing 46 people. The collapse came after more than a year of extraordinarily concentrated strange events in the area, the most famous being the Mothman. Between November 1966 and December 1967, over 100 residents of Point Pleasant and the surrounding Mason County area reported encounters with a large winged humanoid figure with glowing red eyes. The sightings were concentrated around the McClintock Wildlife Management Area, locally known as the TNT area, a former World War II munitions production site with hundreds of concrete bunkers still scattered through the woods. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, the astronomer who consulted for the U.S. Air Force on UFO investigations, reviewed the Mothman sightings reports and declined to offer a simple dismissal. Cryptozoologists and atmospheric scientists have proposed sandhill cranes, barn owls, and misidentified aircraft as explanations, none of which account for the scale, consistency, or the apparent correlation of the sightings with the bridge disaster. The TNT area itself has elevated radiation readings in several locations, a legacy of the wartime munitions work. What was in those bunkers, and what residual effects that activity may have had, has never been fully disclosed. It is also worth noting that the Mothman was not the only strange phenomenon reported in Point Pleasant during that 13-month period. Residents reported men in black, figures in dark suits who appeared at their doors, asking unsettling questions. UFO sightings spiked across Mason County. Telephone interference was reported by multiple witnesses independently. Whether all of these phenomena share a single cause or represent an unusual clustering of unrelated events in a small, frightened community, no investigator has been able to say with confidence. The Silver Bridge collapse ended the concentrated activity as abruptly as it began, which is perhaps the strangest detail of all. Number 7. The Devil's Sea, off the California and Pacific coast. While the famous Devil's Sea is typically located near Japan, a stretch of the Pacific off the California coast between Point Conception and the Channel Islands has produced a density of disappearances and electromagnetic anomalies significant enough to attract its own research attention. The area sits over the Transverse Ranges, one of the most geologically unusual fault systems in North America, running perpendicular to the coast rather than parallel to it. Multiple ships and small aircraft have disappeared in this corridor without explanation. The electromagnetic effects documented here are attributed by some geologists to the unusual stress patterns in the fault system, which can produce measurable electromagnetic fields under certain conditions, a phenomenon called the piezoelectric effect. That is at least a partial explanation, which is more than most locations on this list can claim. The trouble is that the piezoelectric readings documented do not account for the scale of the anomalies observed, and the disappearances cluster in ways that a simple geological explanation does not fully address. Number 6. Dudleytown, Cornwall, Connecticut. Dudleytown in Cornwall, Connecticut is one of the most aggressively private, mysterious places in the United States. The Dark Entry Forest Association, which owns the land, prohibits all visitors, officially for conservation reasons, unofficially perhaps because the volume of trespassers attracted by the site's reputation was becoming genuinely unmanageable. The settlement was founded in the 1740s by descendants of Edmund Dudley, a British nobleman beheaded for treason in 1510. The village struggled from its founding, with an unusual concentration of madness, violent deaths, and misfortune among its residents. By the early 1800s, Dudleytown was effectively abandoned. In the 20th century, the site gained renewed attention when Dr. William Clark, a prominent New York physician, built a summer home near the ruins. After his wife reportedly suffered a psychological breakdown following a period of time spent alone at the property, Clark gave up the place entirely. Paranormal investigators who have accessed the site describe persistent feelings of dread, anomalous photographic effects, and equipment failures. The rational explanation on offer is a combination of extreme soil acidity, near-total canopy cover that creates an oppressive environment, and the power of a well-established legend to shape perception. What exactly happened to all those early residents remains genuinely unresolved. What adds a layer of texture to Dudleytown is that the misfortune was not just dramatic, it was relentlessly mundane. Residents went mad. Others committed suicide. Crops failed year after year in ways that neighboring farms did not experience. The Dudley family itself traced its English ancestry through a line that included not just the executed Edmund Dudley, but also his grandson, Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester and close confidant of Queen Elizabeth I, a man whose own life was surrounded by suspicious deaths and dark rumor. Whether any of that history is relevant to a patch of Connecticut forest is debatable. But the village's failure was so complete and so persistent that it draws attention even without the ghost stories attached to it. Number 5. The Nazca-like lines of Blythe, Blythe, California. In the desert outside Blythe, California, enormous figures are etched into the ground, giant humans, animals, and geometric shapes visible only from the air. They are so similar to the famous Nazca lines of Peru that researchers use the same term for them: geoglyphs. The Blythe intaglios, as they are formally known, were only rediscovered by the outside world in 1932, when a pilot flying over the Colorado desert spotted them from altitude. The largest human figure is approximately 171 feet long. Archaeologists attribute the intaglios to the ancient Mojave and Quechan peoples, and dating estimates range from 450 to 2,000 years old, depending on the method used and who is doing the measuring. What no one has satisfactorily explained is how they were designed and executed to this scale without any elevated vantage point, a problem the Nazca lines share. Various theories involve primitive surveying techniques, the use of small models scaled up by measurement, and more fringe proposals involving ancient astronomical knowledge. None of the conventional explanations have been demonstrated to actually work at the scale required. The intaglios sit in a geologically active area with occasional seismic activity, and some researchers have proposed a ritual or navigational connection to the Colorado River. What they mean and how they were made with such precision from ground level remains genuinely open. Number 4. The Bigelow Aerospace Corridor, Nevada. The area of Nevada stretching from the Nevada Test Site to the Nellis Air Force Range and what is commonly called Area 51 has produced so many unexplained aerial phenomena that the U.S. government eventually acknowledged a formal investigation program. The Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which ran from at least 2007 to 2012, with funding of approximately $22 million, was directed from the 5th floor of the Pentagon's C Ring. What makes this corridor genuinely mysterious is not just the secrecy around a test range is entirely expected, but the consistency of encounters reported by credentialed military aviators. Commander David Fravor, a U.S. Navy pilot with 18 years of experience, described a 2004 encounter with an object off the California coast near San Diego, technically within the Nevada corridor's sphere of influence, that accelerated from hover to supersonic speed with no visible propulsion and no sonic boom. The Pentagon released 3 declassified videos in 2020 showing objects behaving in ways that, according to the official statement, remain unidentified. The All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, established by Congress in 2022, continues to receive and investigate reports. The consensus among the investigators on record is not that these objects are extraterrestrial. The consensus is that they do not match any known human technology, domestic or foreign. That is an uncomfortable place for science to sit, and it has been sitting there for a while. Number 3. The Moving Rocks of Death Valley, Racetrack Playa, California. At the Racetrack Playa in Death Valley National Park, rocks move. Not occasionally, regularly. Some of these rocks weigh hundreds of pounds. They leave long trails in the dried lakebed behind them, some stretching for hundreds of feet, indicating sustained movement over time. For most of the 20th century, no one had ever seen them move, and no one had a convincing explanation. In 2014, a team of researchers from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography finally documented the movement on camera. The mechanism involves a very specific and rare combination: overnight winter rain that partially floods the playa, dropping temperatures that freeze the water into thin sheets of ice, then a morning sun that partially melts that ice while a light wind sets the ice sheets, and the rocks frozen into their edges, sliding slowly across the lubricated mud surface. The explanation is elegant and has been largely accepted, but it raises its own questions. The ice sheets documented were only a few millimeters thick. The movement of rocks weighing several hundred pounds by sheets of ice that thin in winds, gentle enough to barely register on instruments, stretches the model somewhat. The conditions required are so narrow and specific that they occur perhaps a handful of times per decade. And yet the trails are extensive, suggesting a volume of movement events that the frequency of those conditions does not obviously support. Solved, mostly, but not entirely. Number 2. The Taos Hum, Taos, New Mexico. The Taos hum is exactly what it sounds like, a persistent, low-frequency hum audible to a subset of residents and visitors in and around Taos, New Mexico. It was formally reported to Congress in the 1990s after a significant number of residents petitioned for an investigation, describing the sound as a diesel engine idling just out of sight. For some hearers, it is an occasional nuisance. For others, it has caused nosebleeds, sleep disorders, and psychological distress severe enough to drive them from their homes. A team of researchers from several universities, including the University of New Mexico State University, and Sandia National Laboratories, conducted a formal investigation in 1997. They confirmed that approximately 2% of people in the affected area could hear the hum. They could not determine its source. Theories range from industrial equipment at the nearby Taos Pueblo industrial area, to very low-frequency military transmissions, to naturally occurring seismic activity in the Rio Grande Rift. The VLF theory is taken seriously because the U.S. Navy does operate communication systems in those frequencies for submarine contact, and Taos sits in a geographic bowl that could concentrate and amplify such signals. But no one has confirmed it. Joe Mullins, one of the lead researchers, stated after the investigation that the source of the Taos hum remained unidentified. It still does. The Taos hum is not unique. Similar low-frequency hums have been reported in Bristol, England, in Largs, Scotland, and in Windsor, Ontario. But the American version is among the most thoroughly investigated and the most stubbornly unresolved. What sets it apart is the physical effects. Hearers do not just describe a noise, they describe pressure, vibration, and a sensation of resonance inside the chest cavity that matches very low-frequency sound behavior. That detail is important because it suggests the source is producing something measurable at the physical level, not just an auditory hallucination. Audiologists who have examined long-term hearers have not found any shared anatomical explanation for why this subset of the population can detect the hum while others cannot. The 2% who hear something real. What is generating it remains one of the more grounded and genuinely frustrating open questions in American scientific literature. Number 1. The Bermuda Triangle, Atlantic Ocean, off Florida. The Bermuda Triangle sits at the top of every list of American mysteries for a reason. The rough triangle between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico has claimed more ships and aircraft than virtually any comparable area of ocean in the world, and the explanations have never quite caught up with the disappearances. The Coast Guard officially takes the position that the triangle's disappearance rate is not significantly higher than comparable stretches of heavily trafficked ocean when adjusted for volume of traffic. That position is reasonable and is supported by some statistical analyses. It is also contested by other statistical analyses, and it does not explain the specific nature of many of the disappearances. Vessels found abandoned with food still warm, aircraft that vanished mid-transmission with no distress call, ships that reappeared years later in other locations with no crew and no explanation. The most rational current framework involves a combination of factors: unpredictable weather from the Gulf Stream, methane hydrate deposits on the ocean floor that can reduce water density dramatically and cause ships to sink without warning, and the simply enormous volume of traffic passing through the area over centuries. Researcher Lloyd's of London, the insurance market whose word on maritime risk is authoritative, does not charge higher premiums for vessels transiting the Bermuda Triangle, a strong signal that actuarial science considers the risk unremarkable. And yet, in 1945, Flight 19, 5 U.S. Navy Avenger torpedo bombers, disappeared during a training exercise with 14 men aboard. The rescue aircraft sent to find them also disappeared. The last transmission from the flight leader, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, described his compasses as malfunctioning and his surroundings as looking strange, like nothing he had ever seen before. The sea rescue plane that vanished searching for them was found to have exploded, but Flight 19 itself was never found. No wreckage, no bodies, Nothing. Decades later, the ocean floor in that region has been searched with modern sonar equipment, and Flight 19 remains missing. America is a big country, and it is hiding things in plain sight. Scientists keep looking. The answers keep waiting. If you found this one interesting, hit that like button and subscribe. There are plenty more places out there that have no business being as strange as they are.